Next, I'd like to welcome Jim White. Jim's current position is the Senior Vice President, Director, U.S. Consumer Loan, Card, and Collection Services, the kind of guy we never want to hear from. Jim began his banking career with First National Bank of Boston in 1982, working in retail banking. Jim served as the business team leader for the Retail Workstation Project, the largest technology project in the bank's history. He was responsible for a $72 million project budget, which was delivered on time and was the first introduction of a GUI software and intelligent PC in retail banking. So I'm sure that kept you a little busy. Jim was appointed a director of the Bank Boston call centers, overseeing the $50 million call center operating budget and performance management functions. He joined Sovereign Bank as a senior vice president, director of the New England contact center function in East Providence. He managed all aspects of the telephone banking operational transition for the center from Fleet Boston to Sovereign as part of the largest divestiture in U.S. history. Jim joined Santander in 2009.
Santander.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We have to practice that.
Yeah. In 2009, leading the contact center channels for the consumer, business, and employee segments. He currently is leading the U.S. consumer loan, card, and collection services area. So Jim, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
You have a lot of history and
Thank you.
experience to talk with us about.
Looking forward to it.
So let's have a chat.
Great.
So why don't we start off by telling everyone kind of the size of your center and what you're currently doing day to day.
So from the collections piece, which is the contact center space that I lead, we have responsibility for collecting on all the consumer portfolios, deposit accounts that go overdrawn, consumer loans that are delinquent, credit cards and mortgages that customers may be having problems with. In our centers we have about 125 people, collectors, but 70% of the calls are really being handled by automation, by IVRs, both inbound and outbound dialers, and integrated IVRs that allow people to do payments. What ends up with those collection staff across those portfolios are the more complex, the much more difficult calls. And as Linda said, nobody wants to hear from me, but a lot of people end up in collections not because they're having financial difficulty.
Right.
A lot of people end up in collections because they don't understand how to use some of the bank products and services correctly, or the bank has done something that has fouled them up where they've ended up in collections. So our jobs, I think of, is more than just trying to bring a customer current on their financial obligation, but it's trying to help them through the customer service challenges that they have. And as many of us know, we have accounts in many different institutions, and that actually makes it more complicated because it's not one size fits all across all the financial services, products, and services that are out there. We have to deal with different ways that technology has been set up to support us to make it more convenient when sometimes it doesn't work that way, especially across banks. So we're helping people really learn about the new payment technology that's coming out and trying to use that, whether it's with a phone or in an IVR or a mobile app or in the internet. And for a lot of people, that's a very complicated process. So it comes down to education and support in all that we do, and you got to get the right people to do that.
Right, and I think banking is one of those areas where we've seen tremendous change. I mean, we as consumers have taken on a lot more responsibility for that than just walking into a bank. Well, I certainly know when Jim and I were on the phone talking about today's conversation we were going to have, one of the things that kind of struck me is really the requirements that you're putting on your agents, because these are people that may truly be in financial trouble. They are people who maybe just need some education on different products, but you've got, channels across that. So how do you really train your agents? Where do you find them? Because they're doing a little bit more of a challenging job for most consumers to kind of settle them down, make them feel that it's okay that they've got some kind of problem that collections is calling them, but helping to educate them. So where do you come up with these people that have the right skills? Because there's a lot of skill sets required in an individual call.
There are, and it takes a lot to try to find the right people. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the folks that we hire are fresh out of the early stages of the workforce. We're lucky enough to have probably 25 to 30 people that have been with us for 15 years or more. And those people keep us going every day. They're the steady eddies who do their work, who aren't maybe the highest productivity, but they know how everything works. And they end up being mentors for those that we're hiring who are brand new to the workforce or who have come in. And you have to try all different ways of trying to identify those people, because a lot of people think, this is going to be an easier job than it is. I'm just going to collect some money, and it's very simple. And when they really get into it, they find out that it's really not that simple. The training, as Chris said, we have a 2-week training program similar to hers, but in that training program, they're being exposed to the technology, the many different applications, desktop and telephony, that they have to understand intricately, and the regulations, which are growing more and more ominous every day, and much more difficult and punitive if we do something incorrectly, particularly in the collection space. So there's a lot of attention to that and a lot of certification, using online training in the classroom as well as classroom instructors. Beyond that, then we take them out into a side-by-side where they're actually matched up with some of these people that have more tenure and experience, and they're actually doing a second set of allowing them to interact with customers, first listening, then actually doing some of the tasks and using some of the features. And we start them out on the simpler portfolios. Mortgage is probably the most complicated and most highly regulated, so that takes through a process of allowing them over the years to graduate to that level. We start them out with deposit accounts that are overdrawn, and then they can move into credit card and then consumer loans, and then and it's a good progression plan for them because they're using all of that as building blocks in their tenure with us. But it doesn't always work where we've identified the right skill sets. Whether people come in through the traditional means of our recruiters going out and sourcing them, or us. And where we've been most successful this year is, believe it or not, in temp to perm. And we have a lot more success with that because those people are aggressively looking for what we need in people today, more so than we do it ourselves internally. And when it's not a great match, it's easy to separate in those situations. It's not so easy when you've made the decision to hire them, because there's as much regulation on the people side of it as there is on the product side of it. So people tend to, when they've made that commitment to the job, even if it's not working out, they want to do all that they can to make it successful, when it's sometimes, a square peg in a round hole. And that becomes really a much more, when you've got so many demands of everybody else, you're spending 80% of your time on a few people than you are spending on the vast majority of people and processes that you should be spending it on. So temp to perm has worked really well for us. It costs a little bit more, but I think if you evaluated it overall and compared it to our traditional recruiting internally, I think you'd find that it's cheaper actually in the end.
Probably because of identifying who the right people are rather than spending time with the wrong people.
Exactly.
The other thing that you mentioned too that I wanted to highlight that I think is a little bit different in your center than, for example, Chris's center, and that is all of your folks need to be certified before they can start on the phones by themselves. So you not only have your whole processes and technology and your call center operations piece, you also have a certification that's running alongside of that in your training program, right?
Absolutely, and it's an online-based certification program that doesn't just start in the classroom in the online process, in the upfront hiring process, but it also starts and continues on. And I'm one of the people who, all the way up to every level, you have to recertify every year through online tests. And I can tell you that I have a failure rate myself. These are very difficult tests. They're tricky, and they take hours and hours and hours to complete. And you have to do it every year. It's required as part of the regulations in banking. So a lot of people can't pass those tests. We give them multiple opportunities, but in the end, too, if they don't pass the test, they can't take a call either. So like I said, it is what people think they perceive as very sometimes simple, and in the end, it is more difficult. But there are a lot of people who do very well in the industry, and a lot of people who go on, because we're the feeder group to other areas, whether that be the main customer service center or all the other jobs in the bank. So getting it right or wrong and identifying what that person's good at early on helps everybody. It helps them, helps the rest of the company, because they don't have to necessarily stay with us. They can go find a job where their skills and their strengths are going to be utilized better. And we then can weed out the ones that we know are going to be the best for us and our customers. And I think that's what's made it successful in our case.
Well, that's great. I think the other thing that I'm hearing you talk about that Chris also mentioned, and that is that a lot of your less complex calls are kind of weeded out through your technology.
They are.
So your agents are handling more of the complex, difficult, longer calls.
Absolutely. And with about a 70% offload rate in the IVR, all the simple stuff is already gone. What you're left with is longer calls too. So it's more difficult for folks if you don't give them enough time to work through those longer calls and to understand the challenges that they face every day in trying to support a customer who may have a checking account at Bank of America but a loan at Santander that they're having problems with, yet the money didn't come from Bank of America. So you can imagine when they're trying to get on the phone, somebody from another institution where they're trying to authenticate them, but yet there's another bank on the phone with them, and the other bank doesn't want you to hear what the authentication information is, and yet you're trying to help them. So then, you're faced with the complexity of just the telephony across multiple institutions. And so I guess my message in the end is that you should all have one account, multiple accounts, but all with Santander.
That was a little plug, Jim.
Little plug.
Does anyone have any questions here for Jim about it? Yes, sir. We have a hand in the back.
Hey, Jim, you mentioned the collection industry is very regulated. What does that do to your quality monitoring?
Actually, all of our calls, the question was, if you didn't hear it, is what, with our heavy regulation in the collection space, what does that do to our quality monitoring? And it makes it very important, because every call has to be recorded and stored and held for 7 years. The regulators constantly are listening to the calls, as our own internal quality group and management team. They're evaluating about 7 to 10 calls per rep per month. And that all is factored into their incentive pay and how they're doing. So, I mean, it's critically important, and our challenge is to try to listen to and evaluate more calls with the people that we have. And I wish we had more time to do it than we do, but I don't see us ever being able to operate without that quality environment that we have today.
Anyone else have a question for Jim? Yes, sir. Is it all inbound or outbound?
Yeah, there's about 30% inbound, about 70% outbound. And the outbound you have to be very careful with too, with all the regulations with TCPA or Telephone Consumer Protection Act, and dialing cell phones and getting opt-in consent, and also people's own consent with using phone numbers. And that presents all kinds of data problems for banks today too, because a lot of times people don't identify that it's a cell phone. So you've got to then go back and re-communicate with people as they're interacting with you across all different channels about what phone numbers they want to be contacted with and how. So that's presented all kinds of interesting fun for us too. But
For sure, for sure. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a ceiling that you're wanting to shoot for the number of percentage of calls that you have to IVR? You're at 7 days, or?
Well, if you're asking me, if you're asking my boss, they'd probably tell you 100%. But if you're asking me, I would say that, if we could get to where the main customer service center is handling about 85% of them, I think that we'd be doing better than we are today. But I don't think the investment has been on the collection side as much as it has been with the customer service side, unfortunately. So we're kind of the stepchild there.
All right, Jim. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you sharing your insights.